Welcome to the Zealous Advocate Podcast. Join attorneys James Moore, Kevin Littlejohn, and Misty Blagg as they explore law, technology, and persuasive arguments. Sit back, relax, and listen to your zealous advocates.
All right, welcome back to the Zealous Advocate Podcast. I am not Misty Blagg. I'm your resident pinch hit co-host, Tom Harvey, here as always with Kevin Littlejohn. Kevin, Mom left us alone. How are you feeling today?
I think two things might occur. One, either the podcast takes off from this moment because it's the all boys podcast, or two, we get canceled after this podcast. And Missy pulls the whole thing because she's going to be deeply disturbed by what we do today.
I think we're going to get a little loose today. We're joined with one of our former classmates, Mr. David Joyner, who also happens to be an assistant district attorney here in Hanover County and is running for Wilmington City Council. So we're going to talk to him about all that. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for inviting me on your podcast.
We are stoked.
It's been a long time coming, David.
Look, I'm a long-time listener. First time guest.
So you're the one.
Cool.
Look, this is the one view we see every week. Now, David and I, we go back to the first days of law school. And I'm shocked that he agreed to come on the podcast because he used to be deeply frustrated by how much I would talk in class in law school. And so, you know, he was very smart and very bright, and I was very talkative. And so he obviously didn't like me.
Nothing has changed.
We were in the same section.
We
right?
were in the very same section.
Like every first year class we had
Yep.
together. Yeah.
And we sat side by side.
For a couple of them.
Yeah, we did. I mean, Lord, you see, well, he won't admit it, but yeah,
I both ended up in Wilmington.
Yeah, both ended up in Wilmington. He was peeking on my papers. I mean,
it seemed to have worked out.
That's how it was going.
Right,
that's the way the eyes were traveling. Yep.
So I want to kick this off and ask David here. One of our previous podcast guests was Mr. Ben David, who happens to be David's boss. So David, give us the behind the scenes take. What's Ben really like? Give us all the dirty secrets.
The dirty secrets? Well, I don't know any dirty secrets. I mean, I listened to his episode and I thought it was, pretty similar. I actually am in the unique position of having worked both for Ben and for John. Yeah, so some of your listeners may know that they're twin brothers. One is a Democrat, one's a Republican. One works in New Hanover County, one works in Brunswick County, or that's where their main offices are. And I've worked in both jurisdictions. John was my first employer out of law school.
Right.
And so I was living in the Wilmington area, commuting out to Bladen, Brunswick, and Columbus counties, prosecuting district court cases, some superior court work around firearms. And after a while, just sort of shared with John, look, the commute's getting to be a lot. I think that I'm going to look for a role in Wilmington. And he was supportive. He understood that can be really taxing for somebody who's commuting so much.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when I heard that Ben had an opening, I called John and I was like, would you be supportive of me going after this? And he said, absolutely, let's make it happen. And I had an interview within a week. So I'm lucky to have worked for both of them, have had mentorship with both of them. And what I saw on the podcast, what you see is what you get. They're straight shooters and they're great guys.
Well, having an opportunity to meet both of them and through my time when I was with the conference and working as an ADA, they're both fantastic. So I'm sure working for both of them is great.
Just two things. One, Tom is going to jump through this computer screen if you don't slide that microphone closer to your mouth or speak closer to the mic, because he wants everybody here, because you got a lot of good stuff to say. And then two, I just wanted to bring this point up as well. You are a well-rounded student in law school. You've great grades. You were good in all the classes, at least the ones that I observed you in. You chose to go to, you chose to get into this public sector, field of law. What really sort of interested you in coming into maybe, being an ADA and working in the public sphere?
Yeah. So, well, I think everybody has an interesting reason for what got them to go to law school. I would be interested in hearing what you guys have to say about that. For me, it was like 1,000 little things rather than one big thing. I studied political science and English in undergrad, had a public policy minor, and I was like, this feels right. This is the kind of thing that I'm interested in studying. This is what I'm interested in doing. So then the next logical step was go to law school. Got to law school. This feels right. This is exactly where I need to be. Interestingly, I think what specifically got me into criminal prosecution, there's sort of two things that stand out. The first is when I was in undergrad, when I was a junior at Carolina, I was a student there when there were 3 murders committed just off campus against 3 Muslim students. And excuse me, they were it was a pretty gruesome murder. They were executed pretty much in their home over a parking dispute, but there was clearly some racism and religious connotations when they did research on the killer. And I didn't know right away that I wanted to get into criminal prosecution, but that really sort of burst my bubble or popped, my worldview. And sort of dealing with that, I didn't know them personally, right? Like, I'm not a victim of this event, but I'm a community member that is startled, and my worldview has changed and sort of feels like the rug has been ripped out from under all of us.
Right.
So I think that plays a role into the subconsciousness of why you go into the profession that you go into and how you get into this area of law. So that's sort of the first story. And then the second piece of it is when I was in law school, I interned at the North Carolina Court of Appeals for then Judge Mark Davis. He later became a Supreme Court justice in North Carolina. And on my very first day of the internship, it's the summer after my first year, so I really don't know that much at all. And I walk in on the first day of the internship, and he says, "Here's a case," and he hands me this gigantic stack, this file, literally this big. And let me do it in front of the camera. Literally this big. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what's happening? What is this? What is he expecting me to do? And he's like, I need to know basically in the next 3 days whether or not this person gets a new trial. And so I have no idea what the case is. So I walk downstairs, I'm lugging this file with me, and I open it up. And as soon as I open it, I realize that it's all handwritten.
Oh, wow.
And that's why it's so big. It's a handwritten appeal. And somebody who had been convicted of murder had sat in their prison cell and had handwritten this appeal. And the immediacy of criminal law and the impact that it has on people's lives, just reached up and slapped me across the face. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's somebody whose liberty interest is at stake here and who's saying, who's going to listen to me? Will somebody listen to me? And that day I was that person. And so from then on, I was pretty hooked on criminal law.
So I want to drill down in on that. And, I think your primary role, and correct me if I'm wrong, is still as a district court prosecutor. And that was always my role when I was prosecuting. And I find that in the district court, at least in North Carolina, you're balancing a number of different equities. Not only are you there representing the people of the state of North Carolina against, individuals who are accused of committing crimes, but you're also dealing with, they're important to everybody who's a victim, but ultimately low stakes, low level crime where sometimes people are just caught up in the system. How do you think about that when you're dealing with individuals in your courtroom, both victims and defendants, and how to balance those equities?
Well, I think anytime you have a victim's crime, that's priority, right? That's not low stakes. That's somebody who has been wronged. That's somebody who's likely, in my experience, the cases that I work on has experienced family violence, domestic violence, firearms offenses. Those are high priority for us. And from once you sort of have that tier in mind, the next level is, okay, I have limited resources, I have limited time, how am I going to allocate that time? So a lot of what plays out in my work is prioritizing child abuse is number one for the kinds of cases that I specifically handle, because my caseload is Wilmington Police Department, family violence, firearms offenses, and driving while impaired offenses. And then you get the misdemeanor larcenies and the second degree trespasses and things like that, which are all important, and they're important to the people who come to court for them. But you have to weigh the amount of time that you can allocate to a case. How much time can you spend with a victim when a judge is yelling at you to call your next case? So ultimately, the hierarchy for what I do is child abuse is number one. We have a system in place where whenever a child abuse case comes across the desk, my legal assistant knows to get a police report immediately, that I need to be reviewing that I need to be having interviews with victims, witnesses, potentially with folks maybe at the Carousel Center, which is one of our local child advocacy organizations, which does forensic interviews for child victims. Also, DWIs are high priority. We have a similar system in place for those. I think ultimately what you might be getting to is what we call self-initiated cases.
There are some of those.
So North Carolina
North
Carolina is interesting with our criminal legal system in that we're one of the few states where a private citizen can go and swear out charges against another private citizen outside of reporting to a law enforcement agency. And so usually Thursdays are our self-initiated days, and I just make an announcement at the beginning of the day and I say court begins when the judge takes the bench. We're going to go until 5 o'clock or until we're done, whichever occurs first. It's usually 5 o'clock. And it's one of those situations where you're doing sort of rapid fire cases. And yesterday was one of these days where I tried assault case that the defendant said it was a defensive property, defensive self, because somebody's dog had gotten loose. And yes, there are times as a prosecutor in North Carolina where you become the investigator yourself.
Yeah, I think too I was getting at, and something that always struck me when I was in district court, and again, I had a similar remit to you when I was up in Johnston County, and it certainly didn't handle anything involving children. I steered clear from domestic violence court. It wasn't something I was interested in, wasn't something I was emotionally capable of handling. But even that said, I felt like I spent probably equal amount of my time trying to get people out of jail, and I'm talking about individuals who are being held and have been held, and they've been there longer than the maximum sentence they could get, and et cetera. I mean, how often do you deal with that here in North Carolina or New Hanover County?
I mean, I think any district court prosecutor in North Carolina has to deal with that a fair bit. We definitely have a new strategy or a newish strategy in our office when it comes to folks who are being held on very low bonds for nonviolent offenses. I mean, the test should always be, and in North Carolina it is, the test should always be, A, is this person a threat to others? Are they a risk to public safety? And B, if we have conditions of pretrial release which allow them to not be in custody, are they going to come to court?
Right.
And if the answer to those questions are no, they're not violent, and B, we think they're going to come to court, they don't need to be held in custody, because the only thing that you're doing is wasting taxpayers' money by holding them in the jail, and you're ruining their life. I mean, they can't go to work, they can't care for their children, et cetera. The federal system does not have cash bail. The federal system essentially asks those questions, and the person is either held or released. In North Carolina, we do have a cash bail system. We, like many states, still have a system where a judge determines essentially an amount of money. The person gives that amount of money, and if they have it, they can get out of jail. So what we've done, at least in New Hanover County and Pender County, is to have a conversation with all of our district court judges, all of our public defenders, all of our prosecutors, to say, what is the most equitable way that we can set up a cash bail system? Because that's what the state says we have to use. What is the most equitable way that we can do this so that we actually are looking at what level of criminal activity is alleged? Is it a class 2 misdemeanor or is it a class F felony? What are we dealing with here severity wise? And then we ask those questions. Is this person a danger to the community? Are they likely to return to court? And then we've developed a scale that tries not to take people's ability to pay into consideration and really does weigh on those factors.
Now you do, aside from, your primary caseload that you just discussed, you also are involved in some interesting programs with the district attorney's office. I think I've seen you in drug court. I think you were just mentioning that you were in veterans court today. Yeah. And then are you involved in juvenile court as well?
So I'm not a juvenile prosecutor for New Hanover County, although I was when I was in Columbus County for a little while. But yeah, so we have what a lot of people refer to as drug court. The actual name of it is Community Recovery Court. And that's a program, I'm the prosecutor for that court. That's a program that we've had in this area since the 90s. And essentially what we say is folks who have substance use disorder, folks who are battling addiction, and whose criminal conduct and their interactions with the criminal justice system stem from that, they don't necessarily need to be in jail. They need to be in treatment. They need to get counseling. They need to get addiction. They need to get addiction counseling. They need to get medically assisted step-down treatment if that's appropriate. And so what can we do to make sure that that's what they're getting while also holding them accountable for the criminal activity? So some of these folks are people who maybe have more than one DWI, or they've committed a larceny, but it's clear that they're stealing to support a habit. I think we even have a small number of people who are in a domestic violence situation where the victim said, no, I want this. I want them in this program. I consent to them doing this. And essentially the idea is to say this person, but for their addiction, would not be involved in these illegal activities. So we put them on a probationary sentence. They check in twice a month with myself, with a public defender who we have who is the public defender for that program. So they're checking in with the same defense attorney each time. And Judge James Faison, who's one of our district court judges.
I love him.
Who I know that you've worked with quite a bit. And, he's also a pastor.
Yes, at Bird's Chapel on Wallace. Was it Wallace? I think it's the
I think so.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you see his pastoral counseling skills come in when he's talking to folks about, he's great at motivational interviewing and helping people find the positive for situations that are often, they don't have a whole lot of positive things going on. That's why they're in the program. All this to say there are benchmarks for them that they're expected to achieve as far as sobriety, as far as education or employment, as far as housing. And we help them along the way so that they can actually get to a point where they are sober living and reintegrate into society.
Funny story on that point, Tom and David. So I went to drug court or community recovery court. Not as a defendant, but as an attorney. As an attorney, but I had to meet with Judge Faison on a separate issue that I think it was some ex parte order, and I walk in, never seen it before in my life. So I see David in there. Mind you, every time I see David, I go up to talk to David, and David like shoos me away. Like,
I want to talk to you about that. Shoos me away. We got to talk about that today, by the way.
But I'm in there, and I walk in. The first thing I hear, Tom, is everybody's clapping, right? So I'm like, all right.
Oh, that's all Kevin
I'm thinking it's me, but it's not me. It's these, it's these the members of the program completing their program. And when they get done, they get to go up to the bench, and all I heard was, "Do you want a Chick-fil-A sandwich, or Chick-fil-A nuggets, a milkshake, or something else?" So I'm like, okay, I'm standing here because I'm gonna go up to the bench at some point, and I'm gonna get me some Chick-fil-A nuggets out of this thing. So I sit down, and they go through about 4 or 5 people, and then I tell the judge what I got to do, and I go up to the bench, and he signs the ex parte order, and I'm just standing there like,
"Where's my nuggets?"
I like some Chick-fil-A nuggets. And didn't get any. I was like, this is crazy. So I thought that was a really interesting way to promote completion of the program. Just a small nugget, to give, or no pun intended, to give those people a reward.
Absolutely. I mean, the program that we're doing, it's not something we invented. I mean, this is a national best practice model that we use, and the psychology behind it talks about immediate sanctions for bad conduct and immediate rewards for positive conduct.
Right.
And so we try and find community partners who can help us, whether it's a ticket to go bowling, or whether it's a ticket to go to the Cameron Art Museum, or whether it's a milkshake. How can we recognize people who are meeting these benchmarks? Because the program, obviously, the bulk of the expense is on actually maintaining it as a judicial program. We can't go out spending money on, prizes for people who are battling addiction. I mean, that just wouldn't go over well with the public, to be honest with you. Yeah. But it's trying to show them, just as much as we have to sanction and correct the negative behaviors, we're here for you to celebrate the wins. Yeah. And sometimes a win is that you have achieved the program and you're ready to graduate and you are on the path to recovery and you have a strong foundation. And I'll be honest with you, today in Veterans Treatment Court, we had a win that somebody had 3 days of sobriety. And you have to figure out, how do you appropriately respond to somebody? And to get into the specifics of this, how do you respond to somebody who has been in active addiction for a decade when this is the first time they've had 3 days sobriety?
Yeah. Right.
And so that's a win.
That's a win.
Now they are definitely in violation of our program rules. And so we have to have a conversation about that and what an appropriate sanction is going to be. But also we have to acknowledge, look, this person is showing us that they're trying.
Yeah.
So, but I want to talk about this point because I
Okay.
want your thoughts since you were a prosecutor.
Yeah, good. Well, I was going to say, I want to transition and talk to you about running for city council, but I really want to know about this courtroom beef with Kevin. So let's go. Spill
Real
the tea.
quick, here we go. So Kevin doesn't have a ton of criminal district court cases. So anytime Kevin comes in my courtroom, it's usually during a recess to say, hey. Yeah. And he'll come into the courtroom and he'll like shake my hand and dap me up and be like, hey, DJ, how you doing? And I'm sitting here like, Kevin, I have 10 domestic violence victims I've never met sitting in the audience who are watching a defense attorney walk up and like hug me. That doesn't help me with these domestic violence survivors. So did you have to deal with that?
Yes, but I'll tell you what it is. And Kevin might not realize it, but it's fantastic marketing for all those criminal defendants sitting out there. This lawyer's tight with the prosecutor. I'm hiring him.
Like, I'm using DJ. I'm like, hey, come get me. But
and it's like what they don't understand is that we don't actually have any cases against
they don't. It's just I like going down there because I legally grew up with David, so I go down there. This is good to see you in there working, especially when I'm coming down or I'm stressed out about something I'm about to argue. I just go in and speak, and then for you to just shun me the way you do, I'll tell you, it doesn't do well for my confidence when you treat me that way. But I won't hold it against you.
Yeah, like I said, I stood away from domestic violence for that reason. And when I was in primarily DWI court and traffic court and everything, I was close with all the defense attorneys, so that doesn't bother me. But I know that the domestic violence prosecutors really did their best. That had a bad taste in their mouth because they were so close with the victims for some of the defense attorneys who were representing the same clients over and over again with different victims. So,
I mean, it's definitely hard to watch the domestic violence process play out at the level that we do, where we get to know the victims and we see the offenders enough.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
I mean, what is it? A cycle of 6 or 7 times they say before you can break the cycle?
I think it's something about victims. There's some statistic that say something to the effect something to the effect of a domestic violence survivor leaves 6 times before they actually leave for good. Not everybody, of course, but that's a statistic that can be seen.
Well, since we're on the topic, I want to talk about this because I don't get to talk to a lot of fellow district court prosecutors about this, but I think that is one of the most bizarre working relationships you have with coworkers, because you've got your fellow prosecutors who you work with day in and day out.
Right.
You've got defense attorneys who are adversarial, but also kind of your colleagues, and you work with the same group day in and day out. And you have the judges in the courtroom who aren't really your boss, but are in charge of the courtroom. And again, you work with them day in and day out. So it makes for a weird working dynamic. Am I alone in seeing that? Do you feel that way?
100%. And I think, so when I was in law school, people would use the phrase, and it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true, the phrase that a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I first,
particularly in district court,
when I first heard that phrase, I thought it sounded kind of shady, because I thought it meant like, oh, you know the judge socially, you are going to get a sweetheart deal or whatever. No, it actually means you are observant. You pay attention when other people speak. You know how they think.
Right.
You are going to be able to predict outcomes. And because you have a good idea of what the outcome is going to be, you can better advise your client, or you can better advise this victim. So to your point, relationships are huge when you are a criminal district court prosecutor, because you are going to have to deal with the same people every day. Right. To me, it means that you have to always be on your game and always be professional. Right. Because if you blow up at somebody over a case because you're not happy with one little thing, I mean, great. Guess who's in line next? It's that same defense attorney with a different client.
Correct.
So you have to manage those relationships very carefully.
Realistically, I know we're going to pivot to the other hat that you're wearing these days. If it were to come down to it, David, and you were sitting at one table and I was sitting at the table across the aisle from you, you fundamentally believe that you would walk out of that door victorious.
Oh gosh!
I just want to know if you really believe that, because you said it a few times.
When have I
You said that to me a few times, and I've never once made a representation of it, but I still am hungered for the day
I think
that we try a case.
I look forward to that too, because look, I mean, we have almost identical legal training.
Yep.
We've had very similar careers up to this point in different areas of the law, but similar careers. And I would say we probably have about the same level of trial experience. So I think we would make Campbell Law very proud that day.
What a good political answer. Shifting to the next subject.
Let me poll both of you. I bet you'd want to win that case way more than any other case that day.
Look,
just because
my clients would not be done a good service by me defending the case against David, because it would be surely about this relationship. So I would be urged to settle that one.
Well, we've hinted at it a bunch. We've talked about it a little, but David, you are running for city council.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a little bit how your experience in the courtroom has led you to that decision, and also how you think about the role of advocacy both in the courtroom and as a public servant.
Yeah, I have a great question. So I think because I'm in district court so much and I see this sort of span of domestic violence, firearms offenses, what you sort of described earlier as like petty crimes or larcenies or things like that, you see the piece of our criminal justice system that has the most frequent impact on people's lives, because my caseloads are usually somewhere between 75 and 150 cases a day. Right. Because you can prosecute more larcenies in one day than murders. Right. And there are more larcenies on a given day that are committed than murders. Right. So sort of just the structure. Well, I can promise you that statistic is true. It's like an allocation of resources thing, and it becomes, okay, you might have a senior prosecutor who's doing homicides who's going to spend an entire week prepping one homicide case, versus a prosecutor who's in district court who has to prep hundreds of cases in 1 week, because the trials themselves should only last 10 minutes if the offense itself lasted 5, and you just get up and tell what happened. So seeing sort of the downstream effects of some things that are happening socially and what brings people into our criminal district courts is one of the motivators that I have for running for city council, because part of what I talk about when I talk about how a prosecutor promotes justice beyond just finding guilty or not guilty. After you get a guilty verdict, the next question is sentencing. Yeah. And so as a prosecutor, I want as many options available to me as possible for sentencing. I don't want jail to be the only option. Right. I also don't want, unsupervised probation to be the only option. I want people to be placed on probation with terms that talk about staying away from the victim, having no contact, I want terms about remaining gainfully employed, having education opportunities. The court is ordering you to go and complete this GED or this class. Opportunities for the court is going to order you to do a domestic violence offenders program, or the court is going to order you to do a anger management class. And I have worked in a jurisdiction like New Hanover County that has quite a few of those resources, and I have worked in other jurisdictions where those are non-existent. And in my opinion, there is a significant quality to the amount of justice. There's a significant, you just get into different outcomes when you have those options. So as a public servant, as somebody who would be in a more legislative role in city council, I want to be able to have a voice in which resources we make available, which resources we bring into Wilmington. That's sort of the criminal justice piece that's related to it. I'm 29 years old. I'm the youngest candidate in the race. I'm somebody who has been active as a volunteer in many of the races in the past. I knock on doors. I phone bank. I raise money. We did a fundraiser for Sherry Beasley in the last cycle. And it got to a point where I had tailored some of those skills enough where I said, I want to apply these to candidates who are young. I want to apply these to candidates who care about the environment. I want to apply these to candidates who have a vision for where Wilmington can go with transportation. And so I was trying to find candidates who match those descriptors. And frankly, nobody really emerged to have that description in this race. So I said, let's have some conversations with people about the viability of running a 29-year-old on those issues. And that's how we got to where we are in the race today.
Now, your father's he's involved in politics as well.
So it's interesting that you say that. My dad is an elected official. My dad is on the school board in Wayne County, North Carolina, where he retired as an elementary school principal a year or two ago.
Okay.
And it's kind of funny because my dad is not a political person. And he knows that I have volunteered on campaigns and have worked on campaigns, and that's just not the path that he had to becoming on the school board. So we sort of joke that, he's an elected official, but I'm not really following in his footsteps because he got that position because he was recruited to run when a school board member was retiring. Yeah. He was retiring from teaching, and they said, we want you to be on the school board. So I'm really proud of my parents. They're both retired public educators. 100%. I would not be where I am without them and without North Carolina public education. And I'm really proud of the work that he does there.
Well, we just talked about this, Tom and David, off air. And since we're talking about public education and public educators, we've got an interesting issue that's presenting itself in New Hanover County. I think it's set to be decided when September 1st or something at the next school board. Here, we've got that trial on the banning of the stamped book. I've sort of gotten a flavor of the book. Tom, you said you've done about half of a read through the book, so you've got a better flavor than myself. I'm assuming you understand the dynamics of the book.
I'll be honest, I have not read the book.
I haven't either. But we know the dynamics of the issue. And Tom, and I'll start with you because I always like your view on a lot of things because it's very different sometimes, but good always. What's your thoughts? And David, I'll come to you last because I'll let you prepare a response. On the I'll say the community impact, legal impact, and just cultural impact. Choose whichever one you want to respond to.
Of what?
The book ban.
The thought of banning books? Look, I don't think banning ideas or banning books is ever a good idea. I don't think that is something that we do in a forward-looking society, in a democracy. And I'll be honest with you, having read, halfway through this book, I think it's ridiculous. I don't really understand the vitriol directed towards it. But this is emblematic of a larger movement across the country where people don't want to be exposed to opinions or ideas that they don't like. And more important than they don't want to be exposed to it, they don't want anybody else to be exposed to it. So it's symptomatic of the siloing of our information system is what I think.
Racism, anti-racism, and you.
Yep. And the author does a really good job of laying out what his definitions of racist, anti-racist, and what he calls assimilationist. And it just talks about people who are out and out bigoted, for lack of a better word, against people based on their skin color.
Get it for $9.92.
And versus people who want to make people of a different skin color more like whites, and people who don't think skin color should matter. And I think it just talks about that history in America. And look, if we're scared of our history, we're never going to know where we're going in the future.
Agreed.
That's true.
Now, that's a statement. Now, David, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, I'm the son of 2 public school teachers. I trust teachers to teach. I trust teachers to follow the curriculum. I trust them to make the best choices for their students. My mom was an English teacher, right? Like she should have the ability to choose within the curriculum that's offered to her which books best fit the class that she's teaching. I also think this is an advanced placement class from which they're banning this book. I mean, advanced placement kids are inherently on a track where they are preparing for college. They're doing AP classes, presumably to help with college credits. I promise you, when they get to college campuses, they're going to be exposed to these ideas. I don't know what you think you're shielding them from.
Exactly. And look, there will be people who read this book and agree 100% with its ideology, who are going to be exposed to things that they read in college they're going to disagree with, and vice versa. The 2 authors, yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting too, man. I agree with both of you guys' points. I mean, it's, to me, I always heard, and I haven't done the research on the, I'll say quote unquote qualifications of New Hanover County schools with respect to the other counties in the state of North Carolina. But I always thought that we had a pretty good educational system, good model for promoting successful college attendees or workforce members. And it just seems like it does that end no good to begin banning books, in my opinion.
Well, I'll sit here and champion New Hanover County Schools as a product of New Hanover County Public Schools, and my mother was a elementary school principal, much like David's dad. So
nice.
I'll stand here and champion New Hanover County Schools. So I'm a little scared and upset to see this happening, and hopefully it goes the right way, but we'll see what happens.
And I think it's important to point out that the specific parent who is challenging this book, her child was given an alternative assignment, but now they're on this warpath where they want this book. They don't want anybody to read this. So 100% parents should be involved in their children's education. You should definitely be reviewing what your kids are doing and what they're reading. And if you have a problem with that, raise it up the proper channels. But to say, oh, because I personally don't like this book, I don't think any child in this public school system should have access to it, that's ludicrous.
Very slippery slope.
Look, I want to go back. I'm glad we got down this. I think this is an important topic. And David, you got a lot of great insights because of your dad on the school board. But David's running for city council, and we actually have somebody in this room. Kevin, you're an appointed member of a public board.
Right.
How has that affected you? And how do you think about your role as advocate on, I believe it's the housing board. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I sit on as a board of commission on the housing authority. And so as an advocate, just on that board, it's largely protecting, well, because the housing authority is an interesting, I'll call it a business in and of itself. They handle a pretty steep financial budget with respect to overseeing, providing opportunities for all of, the affordable housing in Wilmington. So there's, 6 affordable housing communities that we oversee. And so there's a lot of times, and David, you'll probably be familiar with this here soon, the advocacy really comes into play against fellow board members on whether or not we think certain initiatives that we are considering actually are in the best interest of the members of the affordable housing community, in the best interest of the board, and even help promote the employees that are working with the Wilmington Housing Authority. So that's a lot of times where the advocacy comes in, but then occasionally we'll deal with issues with third parties like general contractors and developers and, banks and things of that sort with respect to restructuring negotiations and deals where, we're actually in a pretty privileged position, I think, being sort of the board of the commissioners, where you kind of already come into these discussions like, hey, we're sort of where you got to pass all things through. Mm-hmm. So you've got to be cognizant of not being having that position in every discussion, like, hey, at the end of the day, if I really want this to be right, I'll be right, and you'll be wrong. So that's not what we try to do on that board. But it's much different than what David is doing. I think you've got a broader brush that you've got to paint a canvas with respect to what you're involved in.
Well, to that end, I mean, I think there's we just talked about education and public education and school boards, but I think a lot of people in this country and probably in this community don't really understand what local government does and what a city council does.
I still don't.
So Dave, why don't you give us a little rundown about what you hope you see your role as on the city council here in Wilmington?
That's a great point.
Hold on, before you start, I want you to know, be careful, because he came to my office 2 or 3 days ago saying, as a Wilmingtonian and a lifelong member here, I've got some real questions that I'm going to ask David. So this is the start of these questions.
That's why I'm here, man. I'm not. Yeah, let's do it. Right. Well, okay. So to talk, I mean, this is a podcast about advocacy.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important
allegedly,
jobs,
I mean,
I think one of the most important jobs that I've had in this campaign is to educate people about what city council does and how the election works. So let's start with that.
Yeah, great.
So there are 6 city councilors in Wilmington, North Carolina, plus the mayor makes 7 on the city council, and all of them are at large. We don't have districts. If you're running for city council, you're running to represent the entire city, and then they're on staggered 4-year terms. So every 2 years we have a city council election where 3 councilors are up for election. We have 3 city councilors up for re-election. One is retiring. Her name is Margaret Haynes.
Yeah.
And then Councilman Neil Anderson and Councilman Kevin Spears are running for re-election. So there are 3 seats total. One of them, I guess you would say, is an open seat because she's retiring. The way that the election is structured is that it is nonpartisan. Nobody's party affiliation will appear beside their name on the ballot. And there are 7 candidates, including Councilman Spears and Anderson, who are running in this pool. So essentially there are 7 people running for 3 seats. We are all running in the same race, all running against each other, and the top 3 vote getters will receive those 3 seats. So that's the first piece, is to tell people that that's how the election works. You can vote for 3 people on election day. You can fill in 3 bubbles. I would love to be one of your 3. I'd appreciate your support.
There's the plug.
There it is.
I'm looking directly at the camera and saying that election day is November 7th and early voting starts on October 19th.
Amen.
And also educating people about the fact that this year is the first year that
Voter ID,
exactly. So you will need to make sure that you comply with the voter ID requirements when you go to vote. So I'm recommending that people go during early voting. That way, if you get turned away because you're not familiar with this new policy, you have time to fix it and come back before November 7th. Don't go on November 7th and get turned away, because there's no fixing that at that point. And then the next step is to say, well, what does city government in Wilmington actually do? There are a couple of things. It's the way that North Carolina municipal governments work is that it is completely delegated authority from the legislature. So the legislature giveth and the legislature taketh away when it comes to municipal powers. So some of the most important roles are things around zoning. So when we're having a conversation about housing affordability, which is one of the pieces of my platform, when we're deciding to rezone or to change zoning rules for a piece of property, that's a city council vote, yes or no, whether that can change and allow different types of development in a given area. You also have the power of the purse when it comes to budgetary decisions, taxing, and making decisions about how we're going to fund things like Wilmington Police Department, how we're going to fund our firefighters, how we're going to fund our transportation system, although our transportation system, Wave Transit, is a partnership between a couple of different roles, the city, the county, the university. There's federal funds there. So all these different pieces of the way that city government works, many people don't know. So I have had people who have asked me questions about my position on immigration. And I'm happy to tell you my position on immigration. I don't have anything to do with the border, and I won't have anything to do with the border. But it's definitely a piece of it, and you have to be a good advocate for yourself and for municipal government in general.
Yep. So since we're here, I do have a couple of, as the lone lifelong Wilmingtonian here at the table, do have some hot button topics.
Well, I mean, so you're right. You are the lone lifelong Wilmingtonian. I grew up about an hour outside of Wilmington in a small farming community called Grantham.
Yeah, we'll accept you down here southeastern North Carolina. We're look,
I'm an 8th generation Eastern North Carolinian.
That's great.
That's something to really brag about right there.
I will tell you, I love this city. I welcome all of the new transplants to this city, and we'll call Grantham
13th generation African American.
Pretty close.
There you go.
But it takes you a while to meet a local Wilmingtonian around here these days. That's for sure. Yeah. So you talked about a couple issues that I've got on my handy dandy cheat sheet here, but you talked about the power of the purse. Recently, the city of Wilmington has engaged in a number of purchases that some people strongly support and some people oppose, but the city of Wilmington did just buy the 12-story Thermo Fisher Scientific building downtown to relocate a lot of city operations, and then also bought the former Coast Guard land, I think, to continue the River Rock.
Right.
I know you weren't on the council then, but what's your take on those? And would you support future land acquisitions for similar purposes?
Yeah, so let's start with the second one. So the continuation of the Riverwalk, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do. It's a huge draw to our city as far as tourism goes. It's a huge point of pride for our city. And having a contiguous Riverwalk is an important piece of making sure that that's something that we have for years and years to come. Yes, I think that was the right decision. When it comes to the Thermo Fisher building, I mean, the two different perspectives are the people who are for it say this is a unique opportunity. We've not had an opportunity like this to consolidate city government into one location or into fewer locations. And so this sale came at a time where it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. We had to jump and make this purchase. And then the opponents say, no, it was too expensive. It was nearly $70 million.
Yeah.
I fall more to the camp of it is a unique opportunity to get us into one location and to have us all housed in one place. I think that the fewer places that city residents have to go to actually interact with city government and get the services they need, having that, the fewer places they have to go, the better. Right. So in that vein, I support it. But I think it's important that you always have to have fiscal accountability. You need to be responsible with how you're spending city funds. And so there's a new conversation related to the building about where in the building city government offices should be. Should they be in the penthouse? Yep. Should they be on the bottom floor? Should they, is there...
See, that's why I shouldn't be on it, because I'd be like, we need the penthouse.
Well, I think the votes as they fall currently are going to land with it being in the penthouse. But I also think that it's a deeper conversation, because I understand the appeal, right? Like, if you can rent out the penthouse and make money to sustain the functioning of the building and not have to use taxpayer money to do that. Right. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We should probably go that route. There's another conversation though about having to retrofit different offices and how much money it's going to take to refurbish and replan some of those different floors of the building, where it may not actually be that much of a cost saving. So I think we need to figure out where the numbers are going to fall. But until we see those numbers, yeah, I agree. We should be on the bottom floor. That makes the most sense. That's the most respectful way for us to treat the people who are paying the taxes.
They got a really nice gym in that building too. I don't know if y'all been in there.
I've not been there.
I have not.
One of the nicest gyms in Wilmington is in that building.
Kevin, we could leave it to you to know where all the good gyms are. That your arms are popping out of your shirt.
No, man.
All right.
Is stiff.
So the next one I want to touch on, you talked about zoning issues and something we've seen, I know a lot across the river, and I believe there's one development like this here in New Hanover County, in the city limits, I believe in Wilmington. We've got developers who are coming in and building a lot of what are single family homes that would have traditionally been starter homes or even mid-level homes that first-time home buyers or people looking to upgrade could buy. And the developers are sitting on these homes and renting them out. In Wilmington, we've got a shortage of surplus for homes. What would your take be looking at if a developer proposed something like that while you're on the city council for zoning?
Yeah, so my housing affordability plan centers around one question. How do we make sure that our teachers, our nurses, and our first responders can afford to both live and work in Wilmington? Mm-hmm. Because if our teachers, our nurses, and our first responders are just commuting out from the surrounding counties, then we are not applying best practices to those industries to make sure that people are getting the education they need, the care that they need, and the public protection that they need by having community policing, by having teachers who live in the same neighborhoods as their students and understand what their day-to-day experiences are. So I'm very interested in how we can make housing affordability centered around workforce housing and keeping people in the city as opposed to pushing them out into the suburbs and the rural counties. The median income, the median home price in New Hanover County is around $400,000.
Yeah.
You're the son of an educator. My parents couldn't buy a $400,000 home when they started their careers.
Absolutely not.
I mean, it's not a workable solution for that workforce housing group. So if we're only going to be building essentially suburb style housing in the city, that's not what I'm for as a candidate. Right. That's not what I'm for as that's not the policy that I'm for. I am interested in a policy that allows us to build with greater density, that allows us to build up instead of out. We don't need urban sprawl here in Wilmington. We don't have anywhere for it to go if we did.
Right.
And also, I mentioned earlier, I am a climate change candidate. I am in this race because I care about the environment, and I'm ready for somebody in Wilmington to stand up for it.
What do you?
The last point is that when we're building, we have to be very careful to protect our wetlands. Wilmington is the 8th largest city in North Carolina by population. New Hanover County is the 2nd smallest county by geographic size. we don't have anywhere to build other than up.
Right.
Yeah.
What did you think of did you watch the GOP debate?
I did. Yes. Last night.
And I forget what was the young man's name that was basically calling climate change a hoax?
Ramaswamy.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, how do you react when you hear people make such an outlandish statement, or do you believe it's an outlandish statement, or what?
Yes, I think that it is outlandish to deny that climate change is real. I think that is ridiculous. And I think it's out of touch with the reality of people who don't have so much money that they can live wherever they want and build wherever they want.
Right.
I mean, basically, you've got in that situation, you've got somebody who is so wealthy that he can say the climate doesn't really matter to me because I can just pay to go wherever I need to go, or I can pay to fix whatever I need to fix if it's damaged by the climate. How many houses have already fallen into the ocean in North Carolina this year?
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. And there was a report, and I have not finished reading the report, but there was a report very recently in the last couple of days that essentially identified Wilmington as one of the top and as one of the most costly places to live when it came to insurance because of the issues that we have with hurricanes and flooding. Climate change is a generational issue. Young people cite climate change as one of their top issues when they're voting. And I am of the opinion, frankly, that you have a generation of leaders in Washington and in Raleigh and in Wilmington who have essentially decided that climate change isn't a sexy policy. It's not an interesting policy. And that's a problem for the next generation. Well, guess what? The next generation's here and we're ready to lead on the climate.
I think it's also important to keep in mind that the climate change is an economic issue too. I mean, if it costs you more to run your AC unit, that's your power bill going up. If it costs you more for your insurance, that's less money you got to put food on the table. So climate change is also an economic issue. I think is something that also gets lost in this.
Agreed.
For sure.
Agreed.
All right. Well, we're on the climate. I got one more hot topic question for you.
Yeah.
Something that really gets me going.
About the trees?
It's about the trees.
Yes,
we got to
talk about the trees.
I mean, this is a point that I have yet to really wrap my head around. It's important. Somebody tell me. I get their trees are important, but why are they important, Tom?
Urban trees, road trees. And
he's talking about all kind of trees in my office.
And let's talk about these front street trees that were cut down. So tell me what you have to say about that, David.
Lord. Oh my gosh. So, okay, look, let me start with the good news. The good news is that pine trees and oak trees, which are two of the most plentiful kinds of trees that we have in Wilmington, at their best, at their peak, they can absorb up to 100 gallons of water a day. So think about that during a natural disaster. Think about that during a hurricane. Think about the effects of that on flooding. And it's not as though you can just cut down one tree that's 75 years old and plant a new one and say, oh, pine tree's a pine tree. Right. No, that new sapling or that new plant is not going to absorb 100 gallons of water a day. So you have to be intentional and thoughtful about planning where trees are going to go and the lifespan of these trees. Now, when we're talking about some of the trees that are downtown that are causing disruption by, creating potholes or that are low hanging over power lines, yes, we also have a responsibility as a municipality to make sure that we have safe streets, we have safe power lines, and that we need to be properly caring for those trees over their life. But the long range plan that we have about our tree canopy is hugely important.
Yeah. I will say too, another thing, having looked into this, I'm very passionate about the subject. I'm glad it's another hot button issue for you too. These tree canopies, particularly road trees and urban trees, help to shade asphalt and paved areas that help reduce urban heat, and something that I think if we can expand urban planting, it really would help with climate as well.
We really don't have like a nice park downtown, do we?
Well, that goes back to the Coast Guard acquisition and trying to make sure that we have green spaces downtown. Really? We have green spaces along the Riverwalk, and that's one of the reasons that I support us having that kind of space. And we're talking about this Thermo Fisher acquisition and all the property that's going to be included with that. Do we have an opportunity there to do some more green space downtown? I think we do.
I think so.
That'll be interesting.
Well, as we've gone through a lot of deep topics here, Misty always prepares something fun. Mom's not here to keep us in order.
Lord,
so
I'm not a part of whatever Tom's about to offer.
You're right. This is just for David. So while you tell us, I know that I've got a few good ones, and I'm sure I can share one. But there's got to be a funny story, one of your best stories from district court. What's a good story from district court?
I banned a witch from the state of North Carolina.
What?
Give us that one. Give us that
one. Okay. Picture it. Columbus County. No, so there was this woman in Columbus County who there were these two women. There's a guy. He has a baby with a woman. He gets a new girlfriend. I don't remember which one. The women were mad at each other. One of them was very interested in voodoo and like Creole magic kind of stuff. And
Black magic.
She kept leaving dead animals on the other one's porch. And I don't know if these were like roadkill animals or if these were like animals that she killed. We definitely couldn't prove that.
Yeah.
But she would do some sort of spell on the animal. This is what she would tell this woman. She'd be like, I did a spell. I'm leaving the animal on your porch to curse you or whatever. And the woman, so she was charged with like stalking and harassment and stuff like that. She didn't get charged, witchcraft. Yeah.
I don't think that's illegal in North Carolina.
How do you prove? So long story short, we worked out a plea agreement where she didn't want to live there anyway. She was wanting to move. And so if we had put her on supervised probation, she wouldn't have been able to leave. So she was already planning to leave the state. So as a term of her plea agreement, she was not allowed to return.
Lord have mercy.
That's a great one.
Crazy. Well, I just had another question. And this is a general question since we are an advocacy podcast. Aside from your experiences and the many different areas that you've had a chance to try cases in and learn the law about, what about you intangibly set you apart from, I'll say, other young lawyers and set you apart from, let's say, the people that you're running against on the city council ticket with respect to your ability to advocate on behalf of interests that, you're speaking on?
That's a good question. And, I'm not here to say that I'm the best advocate in the world either, but so backstory is that of the 7 candidates, although it's a nonpartisan race, 3 are Republicans, 4 are Democrats. And so the Democratic Party had to determine which of the 3 they were going to support. And I say had to, but I mean the leadership of the New Hanover County Democratic Party made the decision that they were going to do that. And I was not planning on that being a part of the process when I ran because they hadn't done it before, but I was asked to participate in a number of forums, to do a candidate survey, to have a meeting with with a mediator essentially who sort of had a conversation with me about strengths and weaknesses of the campaign and viability. And at the end of that, there was a poll and 225 people who have demonstrated a history of being supportive of candidates and working in municipal elections. They were polled on which of these candidates should we support. Well, I won that poll. 90.6% of those people included me in their top 3 candidates that they wanted to support. And the reason that I think that happened is because of my ability to articulate my message. During those forums, I'm not trying to toot my own horn.
Oh, here we go. First of all, you had me dying at that straw poll when we had to vote when you stood up. you said, I'm standing. So we were on this. They got like 200 folks on this Zoom that we're doing the straw poll or whatever. And they got the 4 candidates on that, and they go through their initial introduction, Tom. And everybody's sitting down. Now I will say, I always think, especially for something as important as what was at stake, there's a certain kind of presentation talent you got to have. I think you got to have a suit on, you got to have a tie on, you got to, business, maybe not tie, but certain.
Let's it was ties. We're too
right. Well, I think it was. I can respect the suit and tie when we're handling business, but. So all the other candidates
to always be prepared for a round of golf. I don't know when's going to come my way, but I always want to be ready.
So these candidates are all introducing themselves, talking about their platform. It's fine. Everybody's sitting down. And then David pops up. You might have been the last candidate to go. And so David's not even standing up. David pops up and he's standing up and he goes through one over the time on when you're supposed to stop talking for one, but he just keeps going. And then, but one of the first things he says is, and I'm standing in my living room today, much like I'll stand up for you when I'm your city councilman. And I was like, this has to be the corniest line I've ever heard David say.
What I said.
You said, I'm standing up right now, much like I'll stand up for you. I will pull this tape, David.
Pull the tape. Okay. I'll tell you what I said.
Okay.
I was standing up in my living room on Zoom, and I said, I'm on my feet for this forum tonight because on my feet, advocating for Wilmington is where I'm the most comfortable. That's what I do every day in New Hanover County District Court.
Hold on. Are you trying to say you didn't say I'll stand up for you?
I'm sure I said something to that effect. But the point I was making is that I stand up in court every day and I'll do the same. Yeah.
I was tickled when he said that. I said, they was up here politicking, boy.
Well, you do. You have to be able to answer the questions and be professional.
And it's really, to me, it's interesting to see you in that arena. because we know we went to law school together. I mean, you always were like, you had many different circles and groups that you were a part of. So it was, I never saw you having struggles or connecting and things like that. But it's just when you see somebody who grew up with take that step and be that person, it's makes you proud for one. But it's always funny. Like, I think I might have called you when it was done, just cracking jokes, because it's like seeing like your little brother or somebody do something funny. And it's like, I can't believe you're actually a doctor now.
Well, I'm going to pull out from what you just said that you were proud of me. So
I am. Yo, always, DJ. Always.
Well, as we wrap up here, I want to give you a couple seconds here, David. Why don't you give us and our listeners your elevator pitch? I'm sure we've got a number of people here in Wilmington who are still trying to make up their minds about city council. So why don't you give us your 30-second pitch on why they should vote for you?
This will be a minute.
Sure.
30 seconds.
Kevin, you're not one to talk.
So my name's David Joyner. I'm running for Wilmington City Council. I'm an 8th generation Eastern North Carolinian. I've been in North Carolina public schools from the day that I started kindergarten until the day that I graduated college. I'm the proud son of 2 public school teachers who are now retired. When I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill, I went to Campbell Law School on a partial scholarship, graduated early, and moved back to Southeastern North Carolina, where I currently work as an assistant district attorney for New Hanover County. As an assistant district attorney, I am the Wilmington Police Department Criminal District Court prosecutor for driving while impaired offenses, firearms offenses, and family violence, which is domestic violence and child abuse. I'm running for Wilmington City Council because I believe that we need leaders who are going to lead on climate change. We need leaders who care about our transportation infrastructure and have a vision for where we're going to go in the future, who are not just reactionary to the potholes and the bridge challenges that we have day to day. We need leaders who care about housing affordability, and we need leaders who care about public safety. And as an assistant district attorney, I'll bring my public safety experience to our conversation about what that means for Wilmington.
Awesome. Well, David,
but we can't do it without you. We can't do it without you.
Look, davidforwilmington.com, David Joyner ILM on Instagram, David Joyner for Wilmington City Council on Facebook.
Well, David, we wish you nothing but the best. We can't thank you enough for being here.
Taking time out your day. I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Well, I'll see you tomorrow, I think. Are we doing that?
Yes, we're going to the National Black Leadership Caucus's breakfast commemorating the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington.
I got to tell you, I've never been on a podcast with Kevin where he didn't try and interrupt the outro.
I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead.
No, this is perfect. It's keeping with tradition. And I was just going to say, Kevin, I think we did enough to not get canceled today, but you never know.
I think you did a great job moderating the thing, Tom. I mean, we got a lot of tape to review.
Misty's going to be real proud.
Look, she might hate on him.
Look, Misty and James, I don't know if they're going to be invited back to our podcast, Kevin.
I think it's the Kevin and Tom show going forward.
Well, thank you to all of our listeners, and we look forward to seeing you again next time on the Zealous Advocate Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zealous Advocate Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to follow us wherever you get your podcasts.